Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. Celeste Monroe stood at her kitchen sink, washing collard greens when the knock came. It was the kind of knock that didn't belong to a neighbor or a delivery man. It was hesitant, almost apologetic, like whoever stood on the other side knew they were crossing a line they'd drawn themselves 25 years ago. She wiped her hands on her apron, the same faded blue one her daughter Imani had given her for Mother's Day a decade back, and walked toward the front door of her small brick house on Ashford Street. Through the frosted glass panels, she could see a tall silhouette, broad-shouldered and still. Her heart didn't recognize him yet, but her body did. Her hands trembled as she turned the brass knob. When the door swung open, time folded in on itself. There he was, Donovan Pierce, the man who had kissed her under the oak tree at 16, the man who had promised her forever on a summer night that smelled like honeysuckle and rain, the man who had left her standing in front of her mama's house with a positive pregnancy test in her purse and no explanation except a letter that said he wasn't ready. His hair was gray now at the temples and lines creased the corners of his eyes, but those eyes, those deep brown eyes that used to make her believe in magic, were the same. He looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. Maybe he was. She had died a little the day he left. "Celeste," he said, and her name on his lips felt like a wound reopening. She hadn't heard him say it in over 2 decades, but it sounded exactly the same. Soft, guilty, desperate. She wanted to slam the door. She wanted to scream at him for every sleepless night, every birthday party she threw alone, every school play where she clapped with one pair of hands while other kids had 2 parents cheering. But she didn't. She just stood there frozen, her mind racing through every memory she'd buried so deep she thought they'd never surface again. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Her youngest son, Micah, called out from the hallway asking who was at the door. She couldn't answer. She couldn't even breathe. Donovan shifted his weight, clutching a worn leather bag in one hand. "I know I got no right to be here," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered, like gravel under tires. "But I need to talk to you, please." There was something broken in his tone, something that sounded like regret mixed with fear. Celeste's instinct was to protect herself, to shut him out the way he'd shut her out all those years ago. But there was also a part of her, a small stubborn part, that had never stopped wondering why he left, why he never called, why he let her raise 3 kids in a neighborhood where every dollar mattered and every mistake was magnified. She glanced back toward the hallway where Micah was waiting, then back at Donovan. "You've got 5 minutes," she said finally, stepping aside. He walked in slowly like he was entering a church, and she closed the door behind him. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with everything unsaid. He looked around at the photos on the walls, pictures of Imani's college graduation, Malik's basketball championship, Micah's high school honor roll certificate, evidence of a life he'd missed, evidence of a woman who had done it all without him. Celeste crossed her arms over her chest and waited. She wasn't going to make this easy. He'd broken her once. She wouldn't let him do it again. But as he opened his mouth to speak, she realized something terrifying. She still wanted to hear what he had to say, and that scared her more than anything. Celeste had been 17 when she met Donovan Pierce at the summer revival at Mount Zion Baptist Church. She'd worn a yellow sundress her grandmother had sewn by hand, and her hair was pressed straight, falling just past her shoulders. Donovan had been 19, visiting from Atlanta, staying with his uncle who lived 2 streets over from her family's house. He'd smiled at her from across the fellowship hall during the fish fry, and she'd felt her whole world tilt. Her best friend, Tanya, had elbowed her in the ribs and whispered that he was trouble. Tanya had been right, but Celeste hadn't wanted to listen. She wanted to believe that a boy with kind eyes and a crooked smile could love her the way the songs on the radio promised. They'd spent that entire summer together. Donovan would pick her up after her shift at the corner store where she stocked shelves and swept floors. They'd drive out to the lake in his uncle's old Chevy and talk until the fireflies came out. He told her about his dreams of opening a mechanic shop, of building something with his own hands. She told him about wanting to be a teacher, about the way she loved the smell of new books and the sound of children laughing. He made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Her mama worked 2 jobs and barely had time to ask about her day. Her daddy had left when she was 9. But Donovan listened. He held her hand like it mattered. And when he kissed her for the first time, she thought she finally understood what people meant when they talked about home. By the end of August, she knew she loved him. By September, she knew she was pregnant. She'd missed her period twice and felt nauseous every morning, but she was too scared to tell anyone. She bought a test from the pharmacy 3 towns over where nobody knew her name. When the 2 pink lines appeared, she sat on the bathroom floor of the store and cried so hard she thought she'd break in half. She was 18 by then, just started her first semester at the community college. Her mama had sacrificed everything to help her pay tuition. And now this. She wanted to tell Donovan in person, wanted to see his face when she said the words. She thought maybe he'd hold her and tell her it would be okay. She thought wrong when she told him they were sitting in his car outside her house. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple, and she remembered thinking how beautiful it was. How unfair that something so ugly could happen on such a pretty evening. Donovan's face had gone pale. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stared out the windshield like he was watching his whole future disappear. Then he'd said, "I can't do this, Celeste. I'm not ready to be nobody's daddy." She felt her heart crack down the middle. She begged him to stay, told him they could figure it out together, but he'd shaken his head and driven away. The next morning, she found a letter taped to her front door. It said he was going back to Atlanta. It said he was sorry. It didn't say he loved her. She'd cried for 3 days straight, locked in her bedroom, refusing to eat. Her mama finally forced the door open and held her while she sobbed into her chest. When Celeste told her about the baby, her mama's face had hardened, but she didn't turn her away. "We'll figure it out," her mama had said, and they did. Celeste dropped out of college and worked double shifts at the diner to save money. When Imani was born, Celeste looked into her daughter's eyes and made a promise. She would never let her children feel the kind of abandonment she'd felt. She would be enough. She would be both parents. She would be everything. And for 25 years, she kept that promise, even when it nearly killed her. Raising Imani had been the hardest thing Celeste had ever done, not because her daughter was difficult, but because every milestone felt like it carried the weight of 2 people. When Imani took her first steps, Celeste had been the only one there to see it. When Imani said her first word, "Mama," Celeste had cried because there was no one to share the joy with. She'd worked as a waitress at Lorene's Diner on 5th Avenue, pulling double shifts on weekends, her feet aching so badly she'd soak them in Epsom salt every night. Her mama helped when she could, but she was getting older, her knees bad, her heart weaker. Celeste learned quickly that being a single mother meant being everything: provider, protector, playmate, disciplinarian, and dreamer. She had no time to be sad. Sadness was a luxury she couldn't afford. When Malik was born 3 years later, it was a different story. His father, Jerome, had been a mistake Celeste made in a moment of loneliness. She'd met him at a church picnic, and he'd seemed steady, reliable. They dated for 6 months before she realized he was still married. He'd lied about the divorce being finalized. When she found out, she was already 8 weeks pregnant. Jerome had wanted her to get rid of it, and when she refused, he walked away without looking back. Celeste had felt like a fool, but she'd learned something important. She didn't need a man to validate her choices. She had Imani, and now she'd have Malik. Her mama had been furious, calling her reckless, saying she was making life harder than it had to be, but Celeste had stood firm. These were her children, her responsibility, her love. Micah came 5 years after Malik, and by then Celeste had stopped believing in love altogether. His father, Terrence, had been a co-worker at the diner, charming and funny, with a smile that made her forget how tired she was. They dated for a year, and Celeste had let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this one would stay. But when she told Terrence she was pregnant, he panicked. He said he wasn't ready for kids, that he had dreams of moving to Los Angeles and starting over. He left 2 weeks later, and Celeste never heard from him again. She'd cried, but only once. After that, she locked her heart away and focused on what mattered, her children. She worked longer hours, picked up a weekend cleaning job at the church, and stretched every dollar until it screamed. The hardest part wasn't the money, though money was always tight. The hardest part was the loneliness. Every night after she put the kids to bed, she'd sit in her small kitchen under the yellow light of the overhead bulb and wonder if she was doing enough. She attended every parent-teacher conference alone. She cheered at every soccer game and band concert with no one beside her. When Imani asked why she didn't have a daddy like the other kids, Celeste had knelt down, looked her daughter in the eyes and said, "Because Mama loves you enough for two people." But inside, she felt the ache of it, the shame of it. She'd see other mothers at school drop-offs with their husbands, laughing and holding hands, and she'd feel like she was wearing a scarlet letter that screamed, "Not enough." But she kept going. She had to. Her children needed her to be strong, so she became steel. She learned to fix the leaky faucet herself, to change the car oil, to budget so tightly that she could make a pack of chicken last a week. She taught Imani to braid hair and Malik to tie his shoes. She read to Micah every night, even when her eyes burned with exhaustion. She never let them see her cry. She never let them know that some nights, after they were asleep, she'd sit on the edge of her bed and wonder what her life would have been like if Donovan had stayed, if any of them had stayed. But then she'd look at the photos on her dresser, her 3 beautiful children, smiling and safe, and she'd remind herself that she'd built something real, something strong. She'd done it alone, and that was enough. Or at least, that's what she told herself every single day. There had been moments over the years when Celeste almost reached out to Donovan, moments when the weight of single motherhood pressed so hard against her chest she thought she'd suffocate. The first time was when Imani was 5 and asked why all the other kids at her kindergarten had daddies who came to donuts with Dad Day. Celeste had smiled and said they'd have a special donuts with Mama Day instead. But that night, she'd pulled out an old shoebox from the top of her closet. Inside was everything she'd kept from that summer with Donovan: movie ticket stubs, a dried flower from the lake, and the letter he'd left her. She'd reread it so many times the creases were nearly torn through. She'd taken out a piece of notebook paper and started writing. "Donovan, you have a daughter. Her name is Imani. She has your eyes." But she'd never sent it. She'd crumpled the paper and thrown it away, telling herself he didn't deserve to know. He'd made his choice. He'd walked away. Why should she give him the gift of knowing he'd created something beautiful? The second time she almost wrote to him was when Malik was 10 and got into a fight at school, defending his sister from boys who called her poor and half-bred. Or more, the principal had called Celeste in, and she'd sat across from him, feeling the weight of judgment in his eyes. She'd wanted to scream that she was doing her best, that she worked herself to the bone, that her children were good kids who deserved better than the hand life had dealt them. That night, she'd typed Donovan's name into the search bar on the library computer. She'd found him, living in Atlanta, running a mechanic shop just like he dreamed. He looked happy in the photos, successful, like he'd moved on and built a life without even a backward glance. She'd wanted to send him a message then, to tell him about Malik, about Imani, about everything he'd missed. She'd wanted to make him feel guilty, to ruin his perfect little life the way he'd ruined hers, but she didn't, because she realized that reaching out to him would mean admitting she still cared, and she couldn't give him that power. So she closed the browser, walked home in the rain, and made her kids' favorite meal, fried chicken, mac and cheese, and cornbread. She'd sat at the table and listened to them laugh, and she'd reminded herself that she'd built this family without him. He didn't get to be part of it now. The third time she almost contacted Donovan was when Imani graduated high school as valedictorian. Celeste had sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face, clapping so hard her hands hurt. She was so proud she thought her heart would burst. But there was an empty seat beside her. After the ceremony, Imani had hugged her and whispered, "I did it, Mama, we did it." And Celeste had held her daughter and thought about how Donovan would never know what an incredible woman his child had become. That night, she'd written another letter. This one was angrier. You missed everything. You missed her first word, her first day of school, her first heartbreak. You missed watching her become the kind of woman who doesn't need a man to define her worth. I hope you're proud of yourself. She'd sealed the envelope, addressed it, and put a stamp on it. But she never mailed it. She kept it in the shoebox with all the other unsent words, all the other pieces of a past she couldn't quite let go of. Now, 25 years later, Donovan was standing in her living room, the man from the letters, the ghost she'd carried for 2.5 decades, and she realized that all those unsent words, all that buried pain was about to come rushing to the surface, whether she was ready or not. He looked at her with those same brown eyes, older now, but still somehow familiar, and said, "I know I don't deserve your time, Celeste, but I'm dying." The words hung in the air like smoke. She felt her knees weaken. She sat down on the couch, her hands gripping the armrest. "What?" she whispered. He sat across from her, his shoulders hunched, his voice barely above a murmur. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I got maybe 6 months. And I couldn't die without trying to make things right. I couldn't die without telling you I'm sorry." Celeste stared at Donovan, her mind spinning, unable to process the words he'd just spoken. Dying, cancer, 6 months. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction, some dark, twisted sense of justice that he was finally suffering the way she'd suffered. But instead, she just felt numb, hollow, like someone had scooped out her insides and left her empty. "I don't know what you want me to say," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. Donovan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "I don't want you to say nothing. I just need you to listen. I need you to know the truth. The real reason I left." Celeste's jaw tightened. "You left because you were a coward. Because you didn't want to be tied down to a girl and a baby. That's the truth." He shook his head slowly, pain flickering across his face. "No, that ain't it." He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. "My uncle, the one I was staying with that summer, he wasn't just my uncle. He was the only family I had left. My mama died when I was 16. My daddy was in prison. I had nothing, Celeste. Nothing but a dream and a man who took me in when nobody else would." Celeste's expression didn't change, but something in her chest twisted. Donovan continued, his eyes fixed on the floor. "2 days before you told me you were pregnant, my uncle got diagnosed with lung cancer. Advanced. The doctor said he had maybe a year. He'd spent everything he had raising me, and I owed him. I had to go back to Atlanta to take care of him. I had to work to pay his medical bills. I couldn't do that and be a father. I couldn't do both." "So you chose him," Celeste said coldly. "You chose him over me, over our baby." Donovan's head snapped up, his eyes wet. "I chose survival. I was 19 years old with no money, no education, and a dying man who'd give me everything. What was I supposed to do? Bring you to Atlanta to live in poverty while I watched him waste away? I thought you'd be better off without me. I thought you'd move on. Find somebody better, somebody who could actually take care of you." Celeste stood up abruptly, her hands trembling. "You thought? You didn't even give me a choice. You just left a letter and disappeared like I meant nothing." Her voice rose, all the anger she'd buried for 25 years finally breaking free. "Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how hard it was?" Donovan stood too, his face twisted with regret. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I thought about you every single day, Celeste. I thought about that baby. I thought about coming back, but by the time my uncle died, 2 years had passed. I figured you'd moved on. I figured I'd lost my chance." Celeste laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "Moved on? I had a 2-year-old daughter who looked just like you. I was working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. I didn't have time to move on. I had to survive." The room fell silent except for the sound of their breathing. Micah appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. "Mama, you okay?" Celeste wiped her face quickly and nodded. "I'm fine, baby. Go back to your room." Micah hesitated, glancing at Donovan with suspicion, then slowly walked away. Celeste turned back to Donovan, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. "You said you have a daughter. Her name is Imani. She's 25. She's a social worker. She's brilliant and strong, and everything you'll never be." Donovan's face crumbled. "Can I meet her?" Celeste's first instinct was to say no, to protect her daughter from the man who'd abandoned them. But then she thought about all the times Imani had asked about her father, all the times Celeste had said she didn't know where he was, and now he was here, dying, asking for a chance to know the child he'd left behind. "I don't know," Celeste said honestly. "That's not my decision to make alone. But if you think you can just walk in here and fix 25 years of damage in 6 months, you're wrong. You broke us, Donovan. And I don't know if we can ever forgive you." Celeste didn't tell Imani right away. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out how to explain that the man who'd haunted their lives like a ghost had suddenly become real. For 3 days, she went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, going to her shift at the diner, while Donovan stayed at a motel across town. He'd called twice, asking if he could see the kids. In both times, she told him to wait. She needed to talk to Imani first. On the 4th day, she drove to Imani's apartment in the city, a small 1-bedroom place in a neighborhood that was just starting to gentrify. Imani opened the door in her work clothes, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, and smiled when she saw her mother. "Mama, what are you doing here? You didn't call." Celeste stepped inside, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "We need to talk." They sat at Imani's tiny kitchen table, and Celeste told her everything. She told her about Donovan showing up at the door, about the cancer, about the excuses he'd given for leaving. Imani listened in silence, her face unreadable. When Celeste finished, Imani leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. "So he's dying," she said flatly, "and now he wants to meet me." Celeste nodded. "He says he wants to make things right, but baby, you don't have to do this. You don't owe him anything." Imani was quiet for a long time, her jaw tight, her fingers drumming on the table. Finally, she looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. "I used to dream about him, when I was little. I used to imagine he was a superhero or a soldier, someone who couldn't come home because he was saving the world. It made it easier to accept that he wasn't there." "Imani," Celeste started, but her daughter held up a hand. "Let me finish. As I got older, I stopped making excuses for him. I realized he just didn't want us. And I made peace with that. I made peace with the fact that you were enough, that you were more than enough. But now he's here and I don't know how to feel." She wiped her eyes roughly. "Part of me wants to tell him to go to hell. Part of me wants to scream at him for everything he put you through. But there's also this stupid, childish part of me that just wants to know why. Why wasn't I worth staying for?" Celeste reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. You were worth everything, baby. This was never about you. This was about him being young and scared and stupid. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Imani squeezed her mother's hands, her voice breaking. Do you think I should meet him? Celeste hesitated. She wanted to say no, wanted to protect her daughter from potential hurt, but she also knew that Imani deserved the chance to get her answers, to look her father in the eye and decide for herself what kind of man he was. I think that's up to you, Celeste said gently. But whatever you decide, I'll be right there with you. Imani nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. Okay, I'll meet him. But Mama, if he says one thing that hurts you, I'm done. I don't care if he's dying. I'll walk out and never look back. Celeste smiled through her tears. Deal. 2 days later, they sat in Celeste's living room. Celeste, Imani, and Donovan. Malik and Micah had been told to stay away for now. This moment belonged to Imani. Donovan looked smaller somehow, sitting on the edge of the couch, his hands folded in his lap like a schoolboy waiting for punishment. When Imani walked in, his breath caught. You look just like your grandmother, he whispered. Imani's expression was stone. You didn't know your grandmother, she said coldly. Donovan flinched but nodded. You're right, I didn't. I don't know you either, but I want to, if you'll let me. Imani sat down across from him, her arms crossed. Why now? Why wait until you're dying to care? Donovan's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm a coward. Because I convinced myself you were better off without me. Because I was ashamed, but I'm here now, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Imani stared at him, her face unreadable, and the room held its breath. Malik had been listening from the hallway the entire time. He'd come home early from his shift at the warehouse and heard voices in the living room. When he realized one of them belonged to a man he didn't recognize, his protective instincts kicked in. He'd edged closer, staying just out of sight, and heard everything. The apologies, the excuses, the tears, and all he felt was anger. This man had the audacity to show up after 25 years and cry about being sorry. Malik had spent his whole life watching his mother sacrifice everything for them. He'd seen her work herself to exhaustion, seen her skip meals so they could eat, seen her wear the same coat for 5 winters because she couldn't afford a new one. And now this stranger wanted to waltz in and play the repentant father. Malik's fists clenched at his sides. When the conversation in the living room ended and Imani left, Malik stepped out from his hiding spot. Donovan was still sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. Celeste was in the kitchen making tea. Malik walked into the room, his footsteps heavy, and Donovan looked up. Who are you? Donovan asked, though something in his eyes said he already knew. I'm Malik, Celeste's son. Not yours, though. My father was some other deadbeat who couldn't stick around. Malik's voice was hard, cold. Donovan stood slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Oh, I understand you're angry. You don't understand nothing, Malik interrupted, stepping closer. You don't know what it was like growing up without a father. You don't know what it was like watching my mama cry when she thought we were asleep. You don't get to show up and act like you're some tragic hero. Celeste rushed in from the kitchen, her face pale. Malik, stop! But Malik wasn't done. No, Mama, he needs to hear this. You've been protecting everyone your whole life. Someone needs to tell him the truth. He turned back to Donovan, his jaw tight. You want to know what your absence did? It made me angry. It made me distrust every man I met. It made me feel like I had to be the man of the house when I was just a kid. I had to protect Imani and Micah because there was no one else. And you know what the worst part is? I don't even have the right to hate you because you're not even my father. But I hate you anyway because of what you did to my mother. The room was silent except for the sound of Malik's ragged breathing. Donovan's face was pale, his eyes glistening. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right. Celeste put a hand on Malik's shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. Baby, I know you're upset, but this isn't helping. Malik shook his head, pulling away. I can't do this, Mama. I can't sit here and watch you give this man grace he doesn't deserve. He walked toward the door, grabbing his jacket. I'm going out. Call me if you need me. He slammed the door behind him and the house shook. Celeste closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. Donovan looked at her, his voice hoarse. He's right to hate me. He doesn't hate you, Celeste said wearily. He hates what you represent. He hates that I had to do it alone. And honestly, so do I. She sat down on the couch, suddenly feeling every one of her 43 years. Malik's been the man of this house since he was 10 years old. That's not fair, that's not right, but that's what happened. Donovan sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. I can't fix this, can I? Celeste shook her head. No, you can't. But maybe you can stop making it worse. Before Donovan could respond, the front door opened again. This time it was Micah, home from basketball practice, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He stopped short when he saw Donovan. Who's this? He asked, looking between his mother and the stranger. Celeste stood, her heart heavy. Micah, this is Donovan. He's Imani's father. Micah's eyes widened. For real? He looked at Donovan with curiosity rather than anger, and Celeste realized that Micah, the youngest, had no memory of her bitterness, no understanding of the weight she'd carried. To him, this was just a new person. Just a story he'd heard, but never lived, and somehow that hurt even more. Over the next 2 weeks, Donovan became a strange, uncomfortable fixture in their lives. He didn't move into the house. Celeste wouldn't allow that, but he visited almost daily, always bringing something. Flowers for the table, groceries he insisted on paying for, a toy for Micah, even though Micah was 17 and too old for toys. Imani met with him twice, stiff and formal conversations that left her emotionally drained. Malik refused to be in the same room with him. But slowly, reluctantly, Celeste found herself softening. Not forgive, she wasn't ready for that, but softening. There was something genuine in Donovan's remorse, something broken in the way he looked at the life he'd missed. And despite everything, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of the girl she'd once been, the girl who'd believed in love and second chances. One evening, Donovan showed up with a small wooden box. Celeste was alone. The kids were all out. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and slid the box toward her. What's this? She asked wearily. Open it, he said quietly. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to her, all stamped but never mailed. Celeste's hands trembled as she picked one up and unfolded it. The date at the top was from 24 years ago. Dear Celeste, it began. I think about you every day. I think about our baby. I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. I wonder if they have your smile. I'm sorry I'm not there. I'm sorry I'm a coward. She looked up at Donovan, tears blurring her vision. You wrote to me? Every year, he said, his voice breaking. On the anniversary of the day I left, I wrote to you, but I never sent them because I didn't think I deserved to. Celeste rifled through the box, pulling out letter after letter. Some were short, just a few sentences. Others were pages long, filled with regret and longing and details about his life. In one, he wrote about his uncle's death and how he'd cried for days. In another, he wrote about seeing a little girl at the grocery store who reminded him of what he'd lost. In the most recent one, dated just 3 months ago, he wrote about the cancer diagnosis and how his first thought had been of her. I need to see her again, the letter said. I need to tell her I'm sorry before I die. Celeste set the letters down, her chest aching. Why are you showing me this now? Because I need you to know that I never forgot you. Donovan said. I know that doesn't change anything. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but I need you to know that you were never nothing to me. You were everything. You still are. The words hung in the air, and Celeste felt something inside her crack open. All these years she'd told herself that he'd moved on, that he'd forgotten her, that she'd meant nothing to him. But here was proof that he'd carried her with him, that he'd thought about her, that she'd mattered. It didn't erase the pain, it didn't undo the damage, but it shifted something. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Donovan replied. I'm just asking for a chance to be here for however long I have left. I want to know Imani. I want to know Malik and Micah, even if they hate me. I want to be part of this family, even if I don't deserve to be. Celeste looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy she loved beneath the man he'd become. She saw the fear, the regret, the hope, and she realized something that terrified her. She still cared. Despite everything, she still cared. Okay, she said finally, you can stay. You can be part of this. But the moment you hurt any of my children, the moment you make them feel like they're not enough, you're gone. I don't care if you're dying, you're gone. Donovan nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, Celeste. That night after Donovan left, Celeste sat alone in her bedroom and read through every letter. She cried as she read about his uncle's death, about his regrets, about his dreams of being a better man. And when she finished, she took out the shoebox from her closet, the one with all the unsent letters she'd written to him over the years. She placed his letters inside with hers, 2 decades of unspoken words finally meeting. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if this fragile new beginning would last or crumble, but for the first time in 25 years, she allowed herself to hope. Everything shattered on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Donovan had been coming around for nearly a month, and while things were still tense, there had been small moments of progress. Imani had started calling him by his first name instead of you. Micah had asked him questions about cars. Even Malik had stopped leaving the room the moment Donovan walked in. Celeste had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from the ruins of the past. But then Jerome showed up, Malik's father, the man who disappeared when Celeste was pregnant and had never looked back. He knocked on the door just as Celeste was setting the table for dinner, and when she opened it, her blood ran cold. Jerome, what are you doing here? He looked older, rougher, his clothes wrinkled and his eyes bloodshot. I heard through the grapevine that you got some man hanging around. Thought I'd come check it out. Celeste's jaw tightened. You don't have the right to check anything. You walked away, remember? Jerome pushed past her into the house, and Celeste's heart raced. Malik was in the living room, and the moment he saw Jerome, his entire body went rigid. What the hell is he doing here? Malik's voice was low, dangerous. Malik, baby, just stay calm, Celeste said, stepping between them. But Jerome smiled, a cruel, mocking smile. That's my boy. Look how big you got. Last time I saw you, you were just a bump in your mama's belly. Get out, Malik said, his fist clenched. I don't want you here. Before anyone could move, Donovan appeared in the doorway, having arrived just moments earlier. He took in the scene, Celeste's pale face, Malik's rage, the stranger standing in the middle of the room, and his expression hardened. Who are you? Donovan asked, his voice calm but firm. Jerome laughed. I could ask you the same thing. I'm Imani's father, Donovan said evenly. And this is Celeste's home. If she wants you to leave, you need to leave. Jerome's eyes flicked between Donovan and Celeste, and something nasty twisted in his expression. Oh, I see what this is. You trying to play house with this man after all these years? What, you think bringing him around makes you look like less of a failure? The words hit Celeste like a slap. but before she could respond, Malik lunged. He grabbed Jerome by the collar and shoved him against the wall. "Don't you ever talk to my mother like that?" Celeste screamed for Malik to stop, and Donovan moved quickly, pulling Malik back. "Let him go, son. He's not worth it." Jerome straightened his shirt, his face red with anger and humiliation. "You got your little family all figured out now, huh, Celeste? You think this makes up for all those years? You think this man, this stranger, can just step in and fix everything?" He laughed bitterly. "You're a fool." Celeste stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "Get out of my house. Jerome, you gave up the right to have an opinion about my life the day you walked away. You don't get to come back now and judge me." Jerome stared at her for a long moment, then spit on the floor. "You ain't worth it anyway." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The room fell silent. Malik was breathing hard, his hands still shaking. Celeste felt like she might collapse. Donovan put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, but she wasn't. She wasn't okay. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that the past would come crashing back, that the fragile peace they'd been building would shatter. Malik looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry I lost it." Celeste pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Celeste sat on the front porch with Donovan. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled like wet earth. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for stepping in, for being here." Donovan shook his head. "I should have been here 25 years ago. I should have been here for all of it." Celeste didn't argue. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. Finally, Donovan spoke. "I know I can't undo the past. I know I can't be the man I should have been back then. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving, not unless you tell me to." Celeste looked at him, and for the first time in 25 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. "Okay," she whispered. "Stay." 6 months passed. Donovan's health declined faster than the doctors had predicted. By late spring, he was too weak to visit, so Celeste and the kids went to him. He'd moved into a hospice facility near the hospital, a quiet place with large windows that let in the sunlight. Celeste visited every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with the kids. Imani came most often, sitting by his bedside and reading to him from books she loved. Malik came less frequently, but when he did, he stayed longer. Micah brought him drawings and stories from school. Slowly, painfully, they became something that resembled a family. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what any of them had imagined, but it was real. One afternoon, Celeste sat alone with Donovan while he slept, his breathing shallow and labored. She held his hand, marveling at how much had changed in such a short time. When Donovan woke, he looked at her with tired eyes. "Celeste," he whispered, "I need to tell you something." She leaned in closer. "What is it?" "I love you. I never stopped loving you. I know I don't have the right to say that, but I need you to know you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Celeste felt tears streaming down her face. She'd spent 25 years building walls around her heart, convincing herself that she didn't need love, that she didn't need anyone. But hearing those words, even now, even after everything, cracked something open inside her. "I loved you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I never stopped, and I hated myself for it." Donovan squeezed her hand weakly. "You deserved better than me." "I deserved you at your best," Celeste corrected. "But I got you at your worst, and I survived. We all did." Imani came later that evening, and Celeste stepped out to give them privacy. She stood in the hallway, watching through the window as her daughter held her father's hand and cried. She saw the way Donovan looked at Imani with pride and regret, and she knew that whatever else happened, Imani would have this moment. She would have the chance to say goodbye, to ask her questions, to be seen by the man who'd given her life. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Malik arrived just before visiting hours ended. He didn't say much, just stood at the foot of the bed and nodded when Donovan thanked him for coming. But as they were leaving, Malik turned back. "I don't forgive you," he said quietly. "But I don't hate you either, and I hope you find peace." Donovan smiled through his tears. "Thank you, son. That's more than I deserve." Donovan passed away 3 weeks later on a Sunday morning when the sun was bright and the world felt impossibly alive. Celeste was there, holding his hand when he took his last breath. She thought she'd feel anger or bitterness, but instead she just felt sad. Sad for the time they had lost, sad for the man he could have been, sad for the love that had been broken but never truly gone. The funeral was small. Celeste, Imani, Malik, and Micah stood together as they lowered him into the ground. Imani cried quietly, her head resting on Celeste's shoulder. Malik stood with his jaw tight, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Micah, who barely known Donovan, looked confused and sad. Celeste stood tall, her eyes dry, her heart heavy but whole. She'd spent 25 years raising her children alone, and she'd done it well. She built a family from nothing but love and sheer will. Donovan's return hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't erased the past, but it had given them all something they needed. Closure, answers, a chance to grieve what could have been and accept what was. As they walked away from the grave, Imani slipped her hand into Celeste's. "Mama, are you okay?" Celeste looked at her daughter, strong, brilliant, compassionate, and smiled. "Yeah, baby, I'm okay. We're all okay." Because the truth was, they'd always been okay. They'd always been enough. Donovan's absence had shaped them, but it hadn't broken them. Celeste had made sure of that. She'd sacrificed, fought, and loved fiercely enough for two parents. And now, standing in the sunlight with her 3 children beside her, she realized something profound. She didn't need a man to complete her story. She'd already written it. She'd already built something beautiful. Her first love had walked back into her life, and he'd brought closure and pain and bittersweet hope. But he hadn't completed her. She'd been complete all along. She was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had raised 3 incredible humans alone. And that was enough. That was everything. As they drove home, Celeste looked in the rearview mirror at her children and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The past was finally laid to rest. And the future, whatever it held, was hers to write. Alone or not, she was ready.